Hey guys, how's everything going? This is JSer. In this video, I'm going to talk about why I like and why I don't like Tailwind CSS. If you're not familiar with Tailwind CSS, or even you have never used Tailwind CSS before, please Google it and take a look at the samples to understand what it is. I started to take a look at the Tailwind CSS because I see it gaining more and more popularity on Twitter. So I'm getting a little bit interested in it. And here's my personal review. It's not say I'm 100% accurate, but just a reference, okay? So I will talk about the merit and demerit of this Tailwind CSS. So let's see the concept. First, see the concept, and then we can decide whether it is good or bad, right? Actually, the author Adam has written an article about it. This article actually is super helpful, even if you don't decide to use Tailwind CSS. It's actually a pretty good reading of material to see how should we manage our CSS code. This article describes the transitioning from the traditional semantic way to the utility way, and that's why Tailwind CSS is born. The link is actually in the description below this video. Please take a look. Okay, I'll just extract some of the key claims up from this article and that talks about my understanding. Okay, the first one, it says the semantic CSS is bad. On this point, I totally agree. Yeah, I agree on it. Okay, so this is the typical way of handling the CSS and the HTML markup in a semantic way, right? We even if it is HTML or if it is in a JavaScript component, we define a class name as a hook, and usually it should be only one class, and then we define the CSS code in another file or in another area. In view, we have this view component, but basically the markup and the CSS are separated by this class name. So we have this class name naming problem, right? And this BAM methodology, I never liked it before. And actually, in my current project, we use this kind of semantics, but we don't care about the class name that much, and because we use the CSS component, and the component naming doesn't matter, file name doesn't matter, but still there are cases we like to name the inner components within this component. Anyway, I don't like either. The naming is a problem. We shouldn't waste our time naming things, so I don't like this too. I don't like this either. Okay, the second claim, we prefer composition over duplication. Wow, this totally agree. We don't need to extend this, extend that, so after we modify this part of CSS and don't know where these changes might affect, right? It's super dangerous, and duplication is just not feel, I should say, just a couple things up, right? A couple things up, and it's hard to add modifications. Okay, because the styles are not atomic, I would say. So this point, I totally agree. Okay, the third one, after several phases, utility is the cure. Yeah, I agree. Actually, I actually agree on this. If you see the concern and the deduction from the article Adam wrote, it's super reasonable to conclude that utility is the final solution. But the CSS part is a little not uncertain from my perspective. We will talk about that later. Okay, so finally, what it is, what the Tailwind CSS look like. So here is the example. You see that we have this component comparing to the previous one. Yeah, right. Author bio or the bio image, blah blah blah. Now we only have some abstraction of the pure, like say, pure small combination of CSS, and so this card is rounded, is shadow, and we set what is py. Actually, I don't know that, and this is the font size, I would say, and the border dark color and the flags, yeah, blah blah blah, like this. Your common pattern of text, ellipsis, right? Yeah, blah blah blah. It's like small atomic CSS part, and we just choose them and combine them together, composite them together without using a single class name. Right? Wow, this is much better than semantics, I would say. We would forgot about the class name. We would have forgot the duplication. Yeah, if we want just modify this area, this component, we just modify the class names, right? Without editing the other part. Well, it sounds terrific. And the fourth one enforces consistency. Yes, I agree on this one. The Tailwind CSS actually forces us to use the system design, because we're not setting the exact values, but without the predefined variables. But on this part, I think we could also achieve this in another way without this Tailwind approach. So I kind of agree this one, but it is not the reason we should use Tailwind CSS, I must say. Okay, this is the main 4 claims from the article. I totally agree, actually almost to 100%. So I agree on most of the claims, but now I will talk something I don't agree on, or some concerns about Tailwind CSS. The first one is about the comparison with the inline styles. You will see this description on the homepage of Tailwind CSS. It basically lists up 3 reasons that Tailwind is better in inline style. It said first, Tailwind CSS is designing with constraint using inline styles. Every value is magic number. With utilities, you're choosing style from a predefined system, which makes it much easier to build visually consistent UI. This is actually not true. I think we could avoid the magic numbers by using CSS variables, right? And yeah, if we want, say, add some extra syntax, we could just extend that. Right? In the JavaScript world, we could extend the syntax as we want. But it is designing with constraint is not something that Tailwind CSS is unique, I would say. Even we could just improve our inline style with a little bit of linters, right? To avoid the exact numbers. Okay, the second one, responsive design. You cannot use media queries in inline styles. It's kind of true, but actually we could extend the inline style syntax, so it should not be a so big problem. However, focus pseudo classes cannot be declared in the inline styles. Actually, these 3, the following 2, the 2 concerns here actually narrow down the definition of inline style. It says, it literally says you will write the CSS in a pure HTML with the class names or with the style thing. Of course, with that we're unable to implement the media query or the pseudo classes, but in the most cases, we would write the JavaScript applications, the component React with Vue.js or any other things. The syntax, the inline style doesn't mean that we can only write the CSS in the style attribute, right? We could actually extend the syntax, just like think of the style component. We could actually define the media queries just within that component, right? Also, the child select, the sibling selector, the pseudo classes, we could do that. It's not a big deal. So I don't agree on this part. It's inline style. It's not that incapable. Of course, it's incapable in the pure HTML world, but it's not that true. So this part, I think Tailwind hasn't been able to convince me. Okay, and also Tailwind. Okay. So here's my personal summary of Tailwind CSS. Tailwind is just improved inline style. All right, inline style without the inline style. I mean, improved version. It's just another syntax which makes more easier to write and more powerful. But yeah, Tailwind CSS doesn't mention its own cost of new layer over CSS. What is the new layer? Let's take a look at the sample code here. Here's a component that you have seen that a lot of utility CSS class name here, right? This py8, px8. SM text left, SM max 0, SM py4. Actually, Tailwinds add new syntax to the string, which is the type for class name here. Class, yeah, you see? And it actually not only adds the class name separated by spaces, but it also adds the syntax of these prefix separated by this colon. You see that this is small for small screen. It aligns text to the left. It means that also this will be MD and large LG. Yeah, SM like this. This is for the unit, I would say, space. But it's not hard to understand, but it certainly adds certain level of extra learning cost to this to the CSS world. And also, you cannot understand how it works without understanding CSS. So if you need to use Tailwind CSS, you first need to understand the CSS well, and then you would understand what exactly these claims mean by remembering the mapping between these class names to the real CSS declarations, right? So this is definitely a new burden to to understand the code. I'm not arguing about the readability; it doesn't matter that much, but it's just it's hard to how should I say? Yeah, if you have a good memory, maybe it's not that difficult, but it's just for me. I don't want to remember something that doesn't change the core concept of something. Another thing, say the CSS. If you take a look at the max width, why should we have these abbreviations, right? Why don't we just say it clearly with the CSS CSS rule names, right? Margin auto. Yeah, why should we do like this? Why? All right. Okay. So this is my concern. It's actually adds a new syntax to the string. It's a new dialect to the CSS, but yeah, you still need to understand this is overwork with and less. So this is the cost that Tailwind doesn't mention, right? So, but nevertheless, I love the idea of utility. Just don't like the CSS part. So, but any utility is just an idea, right? It means that we split the concerns about split the CSS into small chunks, and we just use composition and where we want. So without adding new stuff, without the naming problem, right? So I take this utility as a future direction, but CSS is not a must. By CSS, I mean we could just define the styles inline without the cascading, without the C part, without declaring the class name, I would say. So what do I mean is that why not just give up CSS like Flutter, like SwiftUI is doing? Let's take a look at the code from SwiftUI. Actually, Flutter looks pretty similarly. So you see, we define a component. The body, the main entry view with a stack holding two text field, and the first text field will have the given name, and text given name. This is just like the React state, and this is disable autocorrection. Just you could think of like defining autocomplete off in HTML, and also we have this text field style. Round border text field style. This is the general overall style for component for the text field here. You could think that this is the component style in the Tailwind CSS. The CSS not only have the atomic utility CSS, but it also has the card like a component style like card, like other things. So this is something like the component style, but also we could define the commonly used separate atomic style like border, right? Here you could think of like we're defining the border in CSS, and this is the color UI color separator. This is the predefined CSS variable, right? So these two parts, atomic CSS, and this is the component style, right? So this is how SwiftUI will handle its styling. And it actually is perfect. And I'm not saying perfect. It's just natural, right? We don't need to care about the cascading stuff. So based on this SwiftUI, I would propose something roughly. This is just the idea that what about the functional idea is that because if we use JSX, we tend to think about the HTML and tend to think of the class name, right? Use class, and then we tend to think about the CSS, right? And here's a problem about how should we manage the CSS. And here comes the utility CSS approach. And why don't we just give up the JSX like the SwiftUI way, and like here the dev, including the dev and another dev, okay. The child is the component, the argument will be the child, and this is decorator just as a method, and we would use this to define the basic styles like font size. We could also define the constant like the CSS variable font size 6. Here's P6, max width SM, max width SM. This is the basic idea. It's not the robust proposal. It's just the idea, okay? And you can see that in a div here, image, div here and image, we could just say set the source, set the alt attribute, and set the height, set width. So we morphed. I would say we removed the boundaries between the CSS and the attribute. We just defining a component, and we could set the behavior with the predefined method, and also we could set the style with the predefined method, height, width. Or if we just say you needed the full control about the styles, you could just use a separate like text field style here. Maybe we could have a full image style, and you create a separate full image style in another file, and you just import it and apply it here. So it's totally like the SwiftUI. What's the benefit of this? You would say the first, there is no handy shorthand. The P6 stuff, no, we don't want it. And actually in our code, this kind of abbreviation does not improve. It could be more verbose, you may say, in the function idea, but it's more easy to understand. So personally, I hate the shorthand, so no handy shorthand. And second, it's just as JavaScript function syntax. This is just JavaScript, right? Everything is similar. You don't wonder how this works. You don't wonder what it is. Comparing to the here P6, and also we have this medium. The column separated the syntax prefix. Yeah, you don't need to remember that. We could just use the JavaScript function. Yeah, you don't need to care about the CSS anymore, right? You don't, because we're not creating CSS. We're just styling the component without the class name, right? It's super cool. And so the idea from this approach is we declare only a local styles. We don't call this CSS anymore. There's no cascading. We only define the local styles with the least effort, and the other things, let the programs do the rest. We don't need to do the premature abstraction. We don't need to care about the performance. Let the programs do that. I mean, if we do something like this, we could just parse the code, right? Let the programs parse the code, and let the programs optimize it and generate any CSS you want. So we could just say, okay, we see that max width is used here, and also in another component. We just extract this part up and calculate how much burden it adds to the final CSS build, and if it is necessary, we would just create a class name with that and set the class into this div, right? So it's totally, we already break up all the styles into single one, and we could use the program to optimize and generate any CSS. Even if you want the output to be Tailwind, or if you want just use Tailwind, maybe the parser, I believe that the parser will be able to do that and just generates the code if you want, right? But the syntax in the function idea here is just it's just easy to understand and easy to parse, and we don't need to care anything, right? Now, even if the Tailwind says, okay, if you do this, you are achieving the performance because you reduce the CSS bundle size. But does that part need our manual labor? I would say should that be done in programs, right? So yeah, this is my idea. Declare the list styles and let the programs do the rest. So the summary. So this is my review about Tailwind CSS. The summary is Tailwind is on the right direction. I mean, it just reduce the effort we usually do with the CSS. It's the right direction. Use atomic. It's super right. But it's only good for the HTML CSS part. For JS component, for the dynamic world, it is not the final cure, I would say. Yeah, we should ask the programs to do the rest for us. We just should do the listing. The listing is that we just set the style, and we don't care about the class name. We don't want to care about the performance. We don't care about the bundle size. Let the programs, let the AI do it for us. Okay, so that's all of my review on Tailwind CSS. I believe you might have a different opinion on this. Please comment on my video. Let's discuss and hope we can learn from each other. Yeah, it's just a personal idea. Maybe it's not right. Anyway, thanks for watching. I will bring more videos about the trending front-end techniques, and hope it helps. See you next time. Bye-bye.